small fruit production. So how many of you grow small fruit or fruit at home? Or have? What kind of things do you grow?
Cherries,
raspberries,
plums,
Cherries,
nectarines.
plums, nectarines, so some tree fruits.
My husband has 25 fruit trees.
25 fruit trees, that's a lot of fruit trees.
Don't ask about the rest.
Blueberries in a pot.
Blueberries in a pot.
Currants, raspberries.
Currants and
Wow.
raspberries.
Some
Wild
raspberries. I
raspberries.
have blueberries that don't grow.
Just picking
Blueberries that don't grow.
out our tree line, yeah.
I got some berries that were seeded by the birds, I'm gonna pull up.
Yeah. Okay, berries that were seeded by the birds. Yep, they're good for that. So, talk for the next little bit of time here about small fruit production in Ohio. I grew up on a farm and we raised, no, that's wrong. We raised corn and soybeans. We had apple trees and peach trees that never produced peaches, hardly, cherries. We would pick raspberries along the field edges,
Mhm.
and had grapes as well, but never grew too much and we didn't pay too much attention to them. But yeah, so you can grow a wide variety of fruits in Ohio. It's got its challenge, not without its challenges for sure, but there's a lot of interest too in growing your own fruit and things as well. And so we'll kind of go through some of those conditions and things to keep in mind and those sorts of things, and hopefully answer some questions if you have any questions. So, providing you some cultural information on how to grow some of these healthy local foods, and allowing some have some growing conditions that allow healthy fruits to be growing from healthy plants. Things like strawberries and blackberries and and raspberries, and potentially even blueberries as well. So first we'll start with the brambles. Brambles would be those blackberries, raspberries, things that grow on canes, collectively called brambles. Any shrub basically in the rose family, actually, that has thorns, or they can be thornless. Anybody grow any thornless varieties? Okay. But usually we're talking about blackberries and raspberries. So nothing like my favorite are black raspberries. They're really they're not easy to find either. So, but a lot of interest in these things. We've had a lot of advances in technology and selecting for different species that will be varieties that will withstand some of the problems that we have in brambles. But they are perennial, and they have this biennial type of growth habit. So we have primocanes, and those are the first year canes, so the growth of 1 year of the brambles. And then we have floricanes, and those are the 2-year-olds, which flower and bear fruit, and then they die. So it's important to know the difference between a floricane and a primocane, because when you're talking about pruning, you want to make sure you're pruning the right ones. So floricanes and primocanes. So we usually harvest on taste, not color. And they should be really easy to pull from the plants. And raspberries are, hollow. We think about those. They kind of have a dip in the middle, and blackberries are not. They're kind of more solid. Brambles. So we'll talk the first and second year canes. We've got the primocane. Usually it doesn't have very many offshoots, if any. It's just a single little twig there, little cane. And then we have the floricanes that have these side branches on there. And then we've got the growing point, the tip. We've got a crown type of, just similar to a grass, the crown down here with the roots down. And then you can see kind of how they're connected to growth there, how they kind of can spread. So talking about spreading, some are non-spreading, some are spreading. So the non-spreading ones, black raspberries, purple raspberries, thornless blackberries. So they spread by seed, not necessarily through the roots is what I'm talking about. And that's right here, defined by the root buds shooting from new canes up through the soil, away from the crown, seeding and spreading by seed, something completely different. But red raspberries, yellow raspberries, and blackberries are spreading. Do you guys have any fruit growers here in the county? Commercial fruit growers?
apples, but when the Amish have, we have Amish that have a lot of fruit.
There is a couple of berry farms in Champaign County.
Right.
They're real interesting to go to. Champaign Berry Farm is one of them. And, they're a 4-H project that turned into a commercial operation. And then the kids are gone. They live in different states. But yeah, if you ever get a chance down and like to pick raspberries, they have like a U-pick sort of thing. Not too far down the road.
That's cause the kids left.
So then we have summer bearing ones and ever bearing. So ever bearing, we might get like 2 harvests out of them. Summer bearing, generally 1. I think about raspberries kind of around the 4th of July, usually, kind of a guideline. Blackberries, a little bit into July as well. So they have to be, or they should be pruned, and they can be trained. So there's some guidelines for those depending upon what you're growing. So black and purple raspberries, we've got some, we need to kind of tip them back, the primicanes back, and that's in the summertime. In the March, you would remove anything that is done for like your floricanes that have already fruited. You can get rid of those. And you want to tip them so that they'll have more lateral growth. Otherwise, you get these long things that look like those like wild roses. They go all over the place. They can be really not easy to pick, right? So pruning them is ideal. Anything that is like a summer, going to be a summer ripened one, you would in the March again, you would remove those spent things. So a lot of times, so Mark said he didn't do a lot of pruning talk so far. Okay, so a lot of pruning is done when things are dormant. February, March is like prime time to prune most things. So I'll see a lot of that at that time frame. And then fall reds or yellow raspberries is kind of more like ever bearing ones. These can also bear fruit on the primocane. So knowing what species you have or what variety you have rather is important for pruning. But again, in March you can do a lot of pruning. You can even kind of mow those down because they will come back and fruit on the primocane. You never want to do that with ones that fruit on the floricanes, or you'll never get any berries. Important to know. So blackberries, they can be thorny or thornless. They will kind of like top out about 3 to 4 feet and start to kind of lean. So these have not been pruned versus the ones that have been pruned. You can see they get like bushier. There's some benefits to pruning. Again, you would do that in March. You would even can shorten the laterals. You don't want them to get so long that they kind of droop over as well. So kind of make more compact fruit. You'll get bigger fruit in more abundance by pruning. They like well-drained soil though. They're not going to want anywhere that is too wet. Requires the pruning, requires regular watering. It can benefit from some sort of trellis. The Champaign County Berry Farm that I frequent, we do a tour pretty much every year there with Master Gardeners on continuing education tour. And their blackberries, they have it on a like a fence that will lay down. That's not the proper term for it. Trellis that will lay down. So lay down to the ground, and they cover it with a covering because they are particularly sensitive to weather, and so they can die during the winter time, especially if you have a really rough winter. So they keep them covered and laying on the ground to conserve as much heat as possible during that time frame. And then also they have them on a trellis as well, because then it gets sun just kind of on one side, and so they tend to grow on one side and ripen on one side, and that makes it very easy for picking. Bees and pollinators can really, most fruits can benefit from them. Not all of the fruits need bees and pollinators though. A lot of them are, they can benefit from them, yes. And these are, no exception. because they like really well-drained soil, sometimes people consider putting them in raised beds. Does anybody have raised beds with fruit in them? Some people in Miami County have them in raised beds, particularly some raspberries for drainage. But very delicious. You see some on kind of like a trellis here, growing on that one side, very easy picking. Any questions about brambles?
Well, I mean, this is more inside question than anything. Has spotted wing Drosophila made its way here?
Yes.
Has it? I didn't know, cause I mean, it was popular out there, it was pretty much decimating things, so it has made its way here.
Have you tracked for it, Mark?
Yeah, we have.
Yeah, I tracked probably 5 years ago when I was here at a blackberry farm that grew thornless blackberries. And this is just like, went out there and they were so nice. They gave me a whole, like a little pint of blackberries and they looked yummy. So I just like ate them on the way back to the office and then checked my traps and there was like thousands of spotted wing Drosophila. So I know that I ate lots of nutrient-rich larvae. Blackberries. It's like, oh, lesson
It's
learned.
protein.
It tasted good. But
Do
yeah,
they wash off very easy?
They're down in the berry.
Yeah.
So you don't see
yeah.
them until they sit there and then they'll start crawling out at you.
Oh, wonderful.
It's like a little fruit fly, basically. Drosophila is a very small fruit fly. It the females have an ovipositor that it's kind of like razor-like, and they can pierce through the outside of the berry, deposit their eggs in there, and then the larvae develop. And you can do I believe it's a saltwater test, right? Where you put the berries in a bowl or something of salt water, and then the larvae come and float on the top.
Oh, wonderful.
That's one way you can tell if it has spotted wing Drosophila larvae in there. We also have traps. We trapped a number of years ago. Yeah, I don't know if anybody's still trapping anymore. I basically was like, yes, we have it, so I'm not going to trap anymore.
So it doesn't do heavy damage to the raspberry?
Oh, it totally does.
Oh,
They
it
eat it from
does.
the inside out. And so it'll look like really nice on the outside, and you'll touch it, and it just like falls apart in your hands when it's pretty progressed and they're actively feeding. So yes. we do
Is there
have
a
it.
treatment?
Spray like every 7 days. Spray. It's a pretty heavy regimen, very intensive.
And which kind of bug is this?
It's called the spotted wing Drosophila, and it is like a fruit fly species. It's only one of the pests. I mean, there are a lot of pests of fruit, but yeah, that is one that was most recently kind of arrived on the scene.
Well, then you say they have to spray every 7 days, then I'm thinking, what's worse, eating all the pesticides I can't wash off or eating the larva?
That is a personal decision. I was pretty gross. But if you're a commercial grower,
You gotta
people
do it.
don't like worms in their food,
Yeah.
right? Are you gonna buy something at the store that has a worm on it? Or damage from? No, you're not. So the option is you gotta spray it. That's kind of my message with the whole fruit discussion, actually. If you want something, so I told you I grew up with apples. We had 9 apple trees. We never sprayed a day in our lives. But you know what we did with the apples? We didn't take them to the farmer's market. We cut them up. We made pies and
Applesauce.
jams
Cider?
and we had a cider press. Yes. So we weren't worried about what it looked like because I've seen things in apples that should probably make me scared of eating apples because of all the stuff. But if you're gonna take it to the store, it's a totally different thing, right? If your livelihood is selling fruit, you're gonna treat things much differently than if it's just backyard fun, right? Backyard bonus. So yeah, to grow fruit in Ohio, you pretty much have to be on a spray regimen to grow anything without blemishes as far as bugs or disease. So we have that perfect disease triangle of hot, humid, wet, moisture. Usually all the pathogens are present, and then if you're growing fruit, you've got the
So
most.
I had a question the other day, since we have been obviously a tad bit drier right now. Is that promote bugs or demote bugs? Or does it matter? I mean, I know it's obviously less with fungus and bacterial
Uh-huh.
things, but bugs, does
Bugs,
dryness
I don't
make a
really know
difference?
anything that would say yes or
I know.
no.
I have traps set around the county.
Yeah.
In like the last couple of weeks, the numbers
Less?
have went down,
Okay,
the drier it is.
okay.
Do you think that's to do with the weather conditions affecting the plant and the maturity?
Yeah, well, some of it's the life cycle of the
and the
insect,
life cycle?
but I've noticed it in other summers too. When it gets dry, your numbers, you don't have as many.
Well, just because we sell a fruit tree spray and people ask, can I spray now? Well, my answer to that is yes, but then they ask, well, am I gonna have as many bugs? And my answer to that is, I don't know.
And we'll show you a good resource
The
for.
mosquitoes aren't out yet.
Yeah.
That's great.
Okay, so moving to strawberries. So I'm from Troy, Ohio. We just had the great strawberry festival this past weekend.
Where's the leftovers?
Yeah, I actually didn't go. I've lived there so long, I just don't go to strawberry festival anymore. But so we can grow lots of strawberries in Ohio usually, but not without some attention. Usually you can get a crop after the first year of a spring planting. And they only produce for a couple of years. That's when you get the maximum amount of production, and then they rely either on the daughter plants that they've made, or I know a fruit grower. Mark knows a fruit grower that replants strawberries every year. I don't know about that, but. Runners provide from the mother plant, these runners. I talked about the stolons, so like we talked about in grasses, so they have stolons, and that's how they make daughter plants, these additional plants. So the earliest flowers are going to produce the biggest berries. Sorry, that's cut off right there. The biggest berries. And they do attract bees and pollinators to your patch. You know, they're frequented by those pollinators as well. There are two different kinds, June bearing and ever bearing. So the June bearing ones rely on those shorter days, so you think about June, okay, we've just, had some shorter days, and that's usually the largest and heaviest crop. You can de-blossom after the fruit sets to encourage some growth. And the other side you have these ever bearing, which rely on more long days, so they develop over the summer. And they usually get two main crops per year. Usually the second one, specifically the second one is less than the first one, but they're in general less than a single June bearer. And then we're getting these others that are day neutrals and different kind. So they flower, they produce all their fruit and runners at one time, and they have pretty good flavor, but their fruits are a little bit smaller. Planting strawberries, you want to avoid any kind of frosty pockets there. We want like a sunny north-facing slope would be ideal place to plant them. And again, like the brambles, we want something where drainage is not going to be a problem. We want drained kind of situation. A lot of times strawberries are planted on hills for that reason, like little furrows in the ground, or not furrows, but little hills in the ground. And sometimes they're planted under black plastic to warm up the soil a little bit earlier. Being from strawberry land, there's a lot of strawberries grown in my county. So we have a lot of black plastic and variety of different ways to grow them at our South Research Station in Piketon. Be an interesting field trip if you ever consider that. Planting them in the spring, so that mid-April to mid-May. Soaking them before you plant them, soaking for 20 to 30 minutes and watering them regularly can be helpful and help them get established. We want the crown to be, or half of the crown to be above the soil line. So you can see here we've got the crown that is too deep, the crown that is a bit too shallow, and about just right. So when you're planting them, there is a certain method to the madness, wanting them kind of planted right at that soil line, about halfway. So So talking about deblossom and harvesting, so if you remove the flower stalks through the first season, that is gonna promote some feeder roots. It's gonna lead to a really nice fruit harvest in year 2 for June bearers. For everbearings or day neutrals, you know, removing them about 6 to 8 weeks after planting, it kind of saves more energy for those that berry production, and you can get some fruit harvest in year 1. Sometimes after a couple of years, we might need to rejuvenate our strawberries, so removing any dead or diseased leaves certainly something recommended to do. Improving, you know, any kind of exposure to sunlight by removing these, eliminating perennial weeds, anything to kind of get the air movement and as much sun as possible on them is important for most of these fruits. Disease happens when you don't get enough sunlight, when you don't get enough air movement, and water sits, things like that. Those are all conditions that promote disease. So make sure we rejuvenate them before the middle of the summer, that July 15th, and fertilize and keep watering through the summer as well, not just stopping when they, you know, might set the most fruit there in June. So that can look a lot of different ways. Really kind of like tearing them up, rejuvenating them, getting rid of their, you see this example has a lot of grass in them. So getting rid of a lot of that can help. Filling in some areas there.
Does that, grass be gone, does that work like if you have have you ever heard of that product called grass be gone?
Grass be gone.
And it's supposed to kill the grass but not maybe bother the strawberries?
Grass be gone, you can put it in your perennials, it'll kill the grass and not your flowers.
Really? So is it a?
It does work?
Yes.
Huh.
I mean, I didn't trust it either. I had lilies of the valley that had a lot of grass in, irises that had grass coming up. And so I took a small area of my lilies of the valley, sprayed it because I figured the lilies of the valley will die too. They did not. In a week, the grass was gone, the lilies of the valley looked great. It's, Ann, who makes it? It's not a Bondi. Bear? No.
Ortho?
Ortho.
I think it
That's
is Ortho.
It's an Ortho product that we sell at work. But I do not know about strawberries.
I just wondered.
But I do know that perennials you can spray it and it does not kill them.
That question I would say the
Grass
label is
be
the
gone.
law. So
Yeah.
look on the label and see if it's
Yeah.
labeled for strawberries and if it's
Well,
not.
and I honestly can't sit here and say, maybe Ann knows, it doesn't work with like, you know, our ornamental grasses or that kind of thing, I assume.
You need to kill off one
I was gonna say, why would you?
Well, I
want to?
mean, no, to kill grass that might be growing into
No,
ornamental.
you can't spray it on grasses.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
No, it's selective for broadleaves. I mean, for broadleaves,
Grasses?
for grasses, yeah.
Okay, so just if you're needing to rejuvenate strawberries, kind of a outline there of, you know, mowing and narrowing the rows, kind of rebuilding that bed, fertilizing, irrigating, those sorts of things. A lot of people winter mulch. Anybody have strawberries? Nobody said strawberries. A lot of times they are mulched for winter protection, kind of stabilizing that temperature because we can get some injury with some low temperatures.
So if you have raised beds, then mulching will help protect it a lot more?
So the raised bed example was in the brambles, but people do have raised bed strawberries.
We have a lot of people
Can
that
help
do contain.
stabilize those. I won't say that it's like will for sure, you know, keep them safe. It can help.
Okay.
Couple inches deep, making sure that you're taking care to replace it if it gets blown away by the wind. And then removing that straw in the spring, generally keeping an eye on the frost. You do it a little at a time. You can do it, you know, all at once. It's kind of a preference there and an experience thing. But you don't want to yellow the leaves. So if you start to get some yellow, you know, you want to get it off there because that's a sign that they are, you know, covered and need to be growing. Strawberry pie. who loves strawberry pie? I love strawberry pie. So any other questions about strawberries before we move on to blueberries? So I'll have to say that I sent out, I had this part of this presentation, I was looking to add some more stuff, so I sent out an email last week to all of our colleagues asking, does anybody have any, some updated stuff on fruit, who's got some stuff? I was gonna kinda like meld it together, and our colleague in Trumbull County was like, he did his research, did research in Maine on blueberries, and he's like, oh, I've got some blueberry stuff, do you want that? And I was like, I said, growing blueberries in Ohio, or growing blueberries in Western Ohio. Slide 1, don't do it. Slide 2, any questions? He laughed and he sent back me a message that said, yeah, that pretty much sums it up. Very popular right now. They're available at Rural King and Tractor Supply and Lowe's and probably even Walmart. I haven't looked, but they're everywhere, right? Grown blueberries. People are interested in them. Why would I say not really to grow blueberries in Ohio?
Temperature.
Soil's not
Mine's
good.
gotta be acid soil.
Yeah,
It's the soil.
soil, yeah.
So where are blueberries grown?
Michigan.
They like sandy soil. That's
Mountains.
right.
And
Mark
so
was just talking about
vegetables.
Hardin County having muck soil. That's about as far away from sandy soil as you can get. And most of there's a couple things. Sandy soil is one, so it needs a lot of drainage. And then the next thing is acidic soil. What did Mark say that the soil was around here?
Seven, five to-
6.5.
6 something. Blueberries need like 4.5. And we're talking about like, that sounds like, oh, that's only 2 points difference. It's a huge difference, huge, because each of those scales I think is 10 times the one before it. So we're talking quite a bit of difference. So some people are growing them in Ohio. I would say it's easier on Eastern Ohio. Eastern Ohio has more acidic soils than we do. Because we have like limestone underneath our soil, it's just too, the pH is too high. But there are some modifications that you can make if you want to grow these. So I would probably never recommend somebody in Western Ohio having a commercial blueberry operation. That sounds like a failure from the beginning. But if you want to experiment, I love to experiment. So I don't, if it's a low input, that's fine. Just trying it out. But I would probably never expect to get very much off of it. But they do require just very little space and not a lot of spraying. That's probably due to because we don't have a lot of insects and diseases that you get at them as much. But they're not common because they need that acidic soil. So 4.5 to 5, like we already said, and you have to keep that. And that's the hard part. Once you if you make soil amendments in Western Ohio to get the acidity down, that's not something that stays then forever. It is a continual process to keep the soil acidified because it always wants to revert back to its more neutral state. You can get them bare rooted or potted. Can remove off blossoms in the first year to really help that development, and pruning kind of into that open vase shape after the 3rd year can help kind of stimulate growth. So if you're looking to acidify your soil, this would be a good recommendation, a good chart. This is from our Midwest Small Fruit Pest Management Handbook. You say, well, why does OSU have that if it's not good? Like I said, in Eastern Ohio, they might have a better chance of growing blueberries, but also that is a collaborative effort. Several universities, some of that can grow blueberries. So that's what's in there. So if we're talking if he said like 6.5, so if you've got a soil pH of 6.5 and we need to bring it down to a 5.5 or a 4.5 to 5, we're talking about amount of sulfur in pounds per 100 square feet.
100.
So,
I said 100, that's pretty small.
yeah, exactly, 100 square feet, not very big. We would need, you probably don't have sandy here, so Mark, you're probably around the loam clay type of situation. So we're looking at, close to 5 pounds of sulfur per 100 square feet to just get it down to conditions that would grow good. And this is not something that you put on today and it automatically drops the pH tomorrow. It takes several months, usually 4 to 6 months of usually warm temperature for the soil microbes to break it down and for the soil acidification to take place. And then it's something that you need to do on a continual basis. I will say a couple years ago, one of our colleagues in Pickaway County had a blueberry grower in his area, and they used drip line irrigation that had, a feeder right at the base of the plant, and then you put the sulfur acidifier through the drip line irrigation to just change the pH right around that plant instead of on a more broad scale. I haven't asked him lately if they're still in business or not. I was curious about that. But so there's a couple different ways that it can be accomplished. Pots is another one. Another research. There is a researcher on Maine campus that is utilizing the Franklin County Extension Office. They have a garden there that the master gardeners maintain. And they're doing some research about growing blueberries in pots to test it to see if that's a viable way to be able to grow them. But for the first 3 years, you're going to train them and shape the bush. You're going to prune those plants while they're dormant in mid-March. You see a common theme here. Your March is going to be very busy if you're a fruit grower. You want to get rid of anything that is wet, weak, or dead or thinned, especially when we get branches that cross. That can be entry points for disease, so we want to kind of limit that. And then remove any terminal wood or with real small types of branches to kind of promote the better growth. And you see some examples here of areas to prune. You've got canes here, you've got branches and different shoots, and you notice the flower buds and vegetative buds, the differences. They have more fibrous roots, you can see. They kind of go out farther. So a lot of pruning, and we're talking about brambles and bushes and things like that. Examples of what it would look like before and after. You can see basically we're just opening it up for sunlight. That is what fruit needs: sunlight and air movement. Like I said, for fruit ripening and for reducing disease. So this could be very well an apple tree, a peach tree, whatever. We want to open up that canopy. We want to make sure that, every branch is getting adequate sunlight so that it can ripen the fruit and lessen our disease prevalence. Some real examples. Got some cleanup there to do, and lots of growth here that we need to kind of prune up. Ooh. So we have this, I talked about this Midwest Home Fruit Production Guide right there. That's a great resource for lots of different types of fruit. So that's my small fruit. In a few minutes I can go and talk about tree fruits. Any questions on small fruits?
Well, I read if you grow currants or gooseberries, that there should not be a white pine within 900 feet because it would cause, I forget the disease. And I didn't quite understand whether it causes the disease to the white pine or to the currants or gooseberries.
I'm not familiar with what type of disease that might be.
Let me see
It
if I
was
can
in the
find
book,
it.
it's in the book.
Oh.
It's on the quiz.
Yeah.
It
It's
is,
on our
yeah,
quiz. Yeah.
right here.
What's the disease then? Or
Now,
what's the
White pine, is it scale?
white pine
pine.
blister rust. It's a fungal disease, serious, it says. Oh, and it says it attracts, I didn't read the fine print. It attacks white pines and other 5-needled pines.
Okay.
The only reason I zoomed in on that was because I have currant bushes. And our
Okay.
neighbor has an evergreen tree, but I don't think it's white pine, it's got short needles. So,
Okay. So sometimes we have two different species of plants that will have kind of involved in a little bit of a disease triangle situation. One that I can think of is cedars and oh my goodness, the big orange apple rust.
Cedar
or-
apple rust.
Yeah, cedar, and so apples and cedar trees, or junipers can have it too, which eastern cedars are junipers, to confuse you a little bit more. But, they have, the fungus is on both plants and it looks different, and they need both plants to complete the life cycle. And so getting rid of one will get rid of the disease basically. So yeah, apples and cedars don't kind of mix for that reason. So that sounds like another example. Currants and white pines don't mix.
Currants and gooseberries.
Oh, and gooseberries too. Okay, so there's that bulletin again, but this one is probably one of the ones that I sell and refer the most when people ask me about fruits and disease. This is a tried and true bulletin, been around a while, but it gives an excellent breakdown of, all the kinds of fruits that we usually grow here in Ohio, the kinds of diseases and insects that they get, and when to spray them. Whether that be, at green tip, or before bud break, or after bud break, or after petal fall. There's a lot of different timing when you're talking about controlling things. Also, it can be protecting pollinators as well.
Where do we get these bulletins?
Oh, the extension office has them. I'm sure Mark probably has some copies
I think Stuart's got both of them.
of this. This controlling diseases and insects in home fruit plantings. Probably the one of my top sellers, I would say. So this is in general kind of just advice for all fruit growers, no matter what type of fruit you're growing. Like I talked about, sunlight and air is something that is desirable for all fruit. So, because it reduces disease and causes them to ripen. So, we've talked about watering in the morning. For that reason, afternoon, if you have a little bit more control, you can use it in the afternoon if you're doing a little bit more management. Watering low to the ground at a trickle. We don't need to water the leaves for any reason. They're not uptaking the water, the roots are. Pruning is super important for fruit because it increases air and sunlight. And also, you'll get, even thinning crops, you'll get, thicker, or not thicker, you'll get bigger fruit if you kind of limit the amount of fruit that is growing on the tree or the plant. Spacing them apart, not crowding them together if they have a lot of circulation, and sometimes even lifting certain plants for more circulation, like some of our brambles. That's by pruning, and some people trellis them and things like that can help reduce disease as well. There's basically two types of two types of fruits that we grow. I already covered small fruits. So tree fruits, these are the ones that have a single trunk. These are our apples. These are our pears and our cherries and those sorts of things. We also have stone tree fruits. They're sometimes differentiated between, but the peach and the cherry and the plum, they don't, typically don't produce fruit for a number of years after they're planted. Depends on how mature the tree is when you buy it or purchase it as well. But several years, that 3 to 5, that could be upwards of 8 to 10 years before they might produce. Very well, small fruits. A lot of fruit management is integrated pest management, is controlling those diseases and pests. So there's some that have a lot of pests and disease, some that have few pests and disease. But any kind of production, you should start with being able to identify the problem, and then choosing your plan of attack based upon what your goal is and what the problem might be. So planning is important. This is integrated pest management, something you do every day. My mom just told me yesterday, oh, that cherry tree has all the red cherries are on it, so the birds are coming today, right? Like they're gonna get there before we do. So it's something look at every day, and it can save you a lot of money as well down the road if you do it correctly and approach it correctly. So there are a lot of different ways to control, to approach your control plan. cultural and mechanical practices. This would avoid those breakouts before they even happen. Want to make sure that we're using biological controls. There are a lot of insects that are biological controls of other insects. They will eat other insects. If we kind of control all insects in general, then we're going to kill the bad ones too. And I've probably talked about that in several of your classes. And then, of course, chemical control being like the last option. So scouting, Mark and I were talking about spotted wing Drosophila. We put out traps for that to see if we had it. That's the first thing is identify it, and then you approach the problem there, because there is a lot of misuse of particularly pesticides that really can be reduced if we properly plan and manage. I put down organic as possible. It's just not always as rewarding. Like I said, you're not probably going to take the apples to the farmer's market. You're going to make the cider and pie and applesauce from them instead. So a lot of fruit is a lot of pre-planting. There are a lot of cultivars that are resistant to certain diseases that are very prevalent on specific types of fruit. So if you're considering growing fruit, you can do a lot of research and selecting a cultivar. That's like the first thing, to your first kind of quiver, or first arrow in your quiver, to control that. And a lot of times it's, just keeping the good conditions. None of these things like wet feet. So if you have an area that gets too wet, don't plant a fruit tree there, for sure. Want it to be well drained. We talked about soil test and making sure that it had the proper soil conditions before we plant, because these are an investment. These are going to be in the landscape for quite some time in most cases, so you're going to want to make sure that you do your homework ahead of time. A lot of times it's recommended to do on some sort of slope, so you do have good drainage, but most of these require full sunlight. That's like 6 to 8 hours of sunlight. So definitely thinking about the areas of your landscape where it might be best for fruit growth can be what you should do first. Let's skip this next part. Lots of considerations are pests and weeds. There might be specific weeds or other trees or other things in your landscape that would impact the fruit. So being mindful of those. Wildlife. Who has wildlife damage? Lots of that can be problematic. A lot of wildlife like the things that we grow in our lawn. There are, you don't have to list these, but there are a lot of varieties that we can select that, like I said, will be resistant to certain diseases, so making sure that we select those. One of these would be some of these apple problems that we get. Anybody recognize this one right here? Fire blight, that's right. That's a bacterial disease on apples, crab apples, a variety of others. And it's hard to control once you have it, but there are different varieties that are resistant to or somewhat resistant to fire blight. So keeping control of that. What about any of the others? Do you recognize any of the others?
Apple scab.
Apple scab. Insect and disease management book that I showed you at the beginning has a lot of ways that you can control apple scab. This one is black knot. Have you ever seen black knot before? It grows on cherries and plums particularly. It can also grow on ornamental cherries and plums. Doesn't have to be the one that sets fruit. This one is a very destructive disease that kind of just slowly kills the tree. It has to be pruned out, and it's a fungal disease, so there's really no curative measures. There's only preventative measures, and that was where variety selection comes into play.
Does that last one have a name, that fungal? That looks icky.
This one is too blurry. I got this picture from a colleague. I don't recognize. Do you recognize that one? That one almost looks like frost damage, actually, but it must not be under the disease.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure. To ask him about that one. So most of these need pollinators, another tree to pollinate it as well. So if you're considering 2 different trees, make sure that they bloom at the same time. That can be problematic. So looking at when they bloom and when they mature can, go a long way in solving frustrations about you never getting any apples. Now, they've made lots of strides now. Sometimes you can get one apple tree that has, 8 to 10 different varieties on one tree because they can graft it onto one tree. So that solves some of the problem of or you don't have to have multiple trees. But if you are considering 2 trees or multiple trees, then make sure that they, bloom at the same time. Planting your trees, long way, if you plant it correctly, helps in the long run. So incorrectly, too deep, you see the soil line, see the soil line right here, and, the ball, the top is right here. That's too deep. It's the same idea with the mulch, too much mulch, you'll start to get suckers, and you'll start to get, some growth around the tree that can harm the tree and kill it. We wanna plant it right, no deeper than what it's already comes from when you buy it at the nursery. Lots of pests and insects. In apples particular, this one is, looks like a peach tree that has, the borers. There's a couple different borers that peaches get that produce this ugly mess right here. This is what like all of our apples look like before we cut out the pieces to make applesauce and things like that. Lots of different problems. I don't know that this is actually one of them, but this reminds me, these like pits right here, are brown marmorated stink bugs. They like apples, and that's some of the damage what it can look like. They pierce the skin and cause those sunken depressions in them. I could talk about insects and diseases for a long time. Do you have any specific questions about apples and peaches and those like tree types of fruits? Because we're running out of time. I have another one of my colleagues that does fruit like this. He always says that, apple trees and peach trees, they should be the ugliest trees in your yard. Pruning them and keeping them usually kind of on the small side and making sure that it's all kind of open up and looks kind of crappy. Those should be the what you should strive for in your landscape. I said that I had apple trees, and I'm probably the only kid in America that had our playhouse was in our apple tree. It was that big and not pruned, so it's still there. Any other questions? A lot of times with a couple things that come to mind. With peaches, up here, a lot of times we get a frost that's too late, and usually that zaps our peaches. We don't get any peaches because they bloom earlier than our last frost, basically. So they do have a better time a little bit farther south, even when we're talking like I live about an hour north of Cincinnati. They can have peaches, and even that difference is enough to make peaches grow better there. So yeah, considering your hardiness zone, you've got this or something like this in your book too to talk about zones. Talk about pollination. Oh, okay. So I guess like tree fruits. They make dwarf varieties. You might have any dwarf apple trees or pear trees. We had about 4 dwarf apples growing up. Sometimes they can be easier to care for, but they still require, regular care. None of these are just like plant and forget it if you want like bountiful harvest, I would say. And all of these still come into play, the location, disease resistance, and stuff like that. The mature size, so dwarf doesn't always mean the same thing. There's different size rootstock that it might be grafted on, so pay attention to how big the rootstock is. That will tell you a lot about how big it's going to get. And then I talked about pollinators, and not just bees and things, but like the other trees that will help pollinate to make sure that they're blooming at the same time. Full sun, fertilizing, pruning. There's so much to cover on trees and fruits as well. Don't fertilize right away. Wait till the soil really settles before you fertilize. If you're planting a tree, in other words, that will help kind of settle it in, and then the fertilizer can really get at the roots when you fertilize it then. If you're gonna thin like apples or something like that, make sure you do it by mid-June. About 6 inches, either you choose or Mother Nature chooses, because you're gonna get either all small apples or some big, some small, unless you thin them. And the insect and disease list is just forever long. This was from Oklahoma, so it really doesn't have necessarily add up to when it would be our time frame, but the similar kind of chart is in that book that I was talking about, the different diseases and insects and what time of year to control them. But the life of an orchard farmer, very busy, very busy. I think I'm going to kind of stop right there. Okay, never mind. I'm going to talk about pruning. I'll just go through this real fast because you said you didn't have pruning. Pruning, most of these tips can be for any shrub or tree in your landscape, also stands for fruit as well. But there are different types of pruners, from hand pruners to, these are called the anvil bypass, or these are the bypass pruners. Those are what most people prefer. You only sharpen them on one side, the side that has like kind of the beveled look to it, so you only sharpen on one side. These, anybody like these a lot? I don't like them a lot. They tend to smash whatever I'm trying to cut because of the way they're designed. So the bypass is more, I would say, a favorite. These are good for the smaller stems. And then I talked about the two types, the anvil and the bypass. When you're getting something, these are kind of set up for smallest to largest. So then the next step, if you have something bigger than 3/4 of an inch, you would use a lopper. Basically just a bypass pruner that is, instead of a hand thing, it's more of a bigger. Again, you only sharpen. You're sharpening. So actually, if you imagine this, the beveled side is going to be on the opposite side of what you see right here. So you're sharpening on the opposite side, which might be kind of like backwards for some people to think about. But that's how you properly care for pruners like that. Another option can be pruning saw. These can fold up sometimes. Those are handy to have ones that fold. Not all of them fold. These are for a little bit bigger things that you're cutting. Coarsely toothed. They can be about like that long, I would say. So this can be an option. There are also pole pruners. These are very helpful for areas where you can't get a ladder or it's not safe to use a ladder, something like that. Those can be an option. Up to 2 inches in diameter. Chainsaws, of course. And they vary in length and can be gasoline or electric. And just consider the task that you're setting out to do. I have my I call my little lady chainsaw. That is only about the bar is only about like this big, and I love it. I can handle it. It's not too heavy for me. I can start it. All those things. So there are some good ones out there.
Yeah, exactly.
Hedge trimmers, either old trusty mechanical one, or you have to use a lot of sweat equity for, or electric one. Both work, and those are mostly for hedges. Usually, I think about that's what I think when I use those hedges. These can cause a lot of some problems if you use these a little too much, like on boxwoods and taxus and stuff like that. Cause some death in areas, and it can become kind of not looking very nicely. Be careful about overusing those. And then buying quality tools, always important. You start with quality tools and maintaining them. When you're using these for disease, like in the case of that black knot disease or the fire blight disease, that is a bacterial that you can spread to anything else that you use your pruner for. Different parts of the tree, so it's recommended that you disinfect your pruners in between each cut, not each job, each cut. Disinfecting them, especially when disease is present, can help not spread that. have to take care of these, of course. Sanitizing, oiling them, and making sure that they're sharp, just like your mower blades. Same thing. Keeping track of those. I mentioned we talked a lot about airflow, and just increasing airflow helps the sunlight penetration and helps disease and insect presence. When you're talking about cutting, how do you approach it? You want to get rid of the dead, get rid of the damage, the disease, and the defective. It's kind of the 4 Ds that you're considering when you're pruning. And there are ways to prune to help the overall health of the tree. There's this natural branch ridge right here, that you don't want to cut into, that can cause damage to the tree, so make sure you're on the other side of it. A lot of it is standing back and looking and seeing, what doesn't look right to take off. A lot of our fruit trees in particular, like apples and things, have suckers a lot. So you get these little shoots right here. We don't want that. You want more, because it's not going to grow a good fruit. It's going to shade things. Get rid of that. You're looking for stuff that is shaded, stuff that is not, a main support or something that is, growing weird, awkward. Get rid of that. Get rid of this. This is going to get in your hair when you're mowing and stuff like that. That's what I do. And then you want to make sure, I showed that branch ridge. You want to make sure that you leave a little bit like that, because it is going to protect the overall trunk of the tree. When we get too close in here, like this, we're actually cutting the part of the trunk out. We don't want to do that. That just allows water to sit, disease entrance, not very good. You want to make sure you have kind of this like lip on it. And that, in the case of very large branches, sometimes that might mean 3 cuts. So you might, if you're cutting a large branch off, 1 cut, a second cut to remove most of that, and then a final cut. Otherwise, you can get some, I think I have a picture of it, where the weight of it might take off some of the bark and really damage part of the tree. When you're pruning, whatever buds you have, that's like the way the growth is going to go. So if this bud right here, the growth is going to happen this way. So keep that in mind when you're pruning. If you would cut it right here, that growth is going to go right into this one, right? We don't necessarily want that. We want the growth to go this way, down, and make it open. That's what we're usually worried about. So it's kind of a side-by-side on how you might go about pruning. I sent this all to Mark so that he can help, or that you can kind of refer back to it as well. You don't need to paint prunes or pruning marks. You don't need to do that. The trees have this kind of natural band-aid they use. It's really not necessary to treat them. And Miami County does a whole 6-week thing on pruning, so I can go on and on and on. So I will stop right there and ask if you have any questions that I can answer as we wrap up today.
So there is an apple orchard on the way to Columbus on 31 outside of Mount Victory. And they're training their apple trees to do I forget what that's called, on a trellis.
Oh, yeah.
They're not Escalade.
Yeah.
They're just, I think that's just holding them in line. They're not,
Oh, I thought they were actually training
I think there's wires on both sides just to kind of keep them in check.
Keep the winds from blowing them away.
Yeah,
Probably
use it,
yeah.
pruned for, well, what kind of roses?
The Escalade would be up against like a wall.
Right.
Knockout roses.
I thought they had modified it,
I don't
just
And they're just really
and you
small
basically
little
just
dwarf
prune all the
trees.
dead stuff. Usually, I talk about roses as like an urn shape is what you're looking for in a rose.
So you say it's okay to prune apple trees right now?
No,
Said in June.
no, no. Those trees need pruned in March. Otherwise, yeah, we don't prune them when they're actively growing and especially setting fruit. That's not the most ideal time to prune them.
Is it okay to pull off the suckers though, as they're coming on?
On the ground or the actual, I mean, so pulling off suckers is pruning. So
Right,
the best time to prune is that February, March when they're dormant.
well, I mean, not the new suckers that are coming out, you know, these little ones that are coming up and you can just. Dr. Lindsay, I don't know if any of you remember him, he said you could prune an apple tree anytime you walk by with a pocket knife.
So did my grandpa.
So like water sprouts is what she's talking
Yeah, the
about.
Right,
little water
yeah.
sprouts,
Yeah.
you know, they're just,
you
little-
But they only grow in the winter, summertime, don't they?
these water sprouts grow constantly.
I mean, I have a lot on the ground that I do most of my pruning in the wintertime because it,
Well, yeah, my husband has a,
yeah.
I mean, he aggressively does it, it's unbelievable how fast they grow. Cause they're all pruned in March,
Yeah,
but there's all kinds of water sprouts shooting up all over.
yeah.
So I just was wondering, cause I tend to walk by and pick them all off.
The thing with doing it now is the fear of disease,
Mm-hmm.
spreading disease. Because if you trim them and you have disease, then yeah, you could spread disease, and it opens it up to like an open wound,
Right.
you know, for disease. So as OSU Extension, the best time to prune is in February and March.
And
So that's considered pruning.
You're cut. I don't see how it's any different than taking anything else off. It's pruning. That's what I'll say.
Even maple trees and stuff?
All trees. All trees. There's a very few exceptions. You should be pruning all trees and shrubs, with a few exceptions, in February and March. Now, shrubs that bloom in the springtime, you can prune them after they bloom.
Okay.
That is the best time to prune spring blooming shrubs.
Forsythia. and
Lilac, forsythia, viburnum, nine bark,
mock
Others.
orange.
mock orange. I can't think of anything else right now. But yes, it's for disease, and when you think about it, especially when you're talking about large scale pruning, you know, it's easier to do when the leaves aren't on them. You can see the branches that are crossing. You can see everything. You were talking about roses too. Be careful about pruning, or pay attention to the buds, because that's going to give you an idea of where that shoot is going to, because once you cut it off, that next bud is going to grow. So you want to make sure you always prune to an outside bud for roses, because you're trying to open up that canopy. Well, thank you all for having me here today, and I wish you luck on your intern